We'd love to put you straight into some breakout rooms in the spirit of system convening and give you an opportunity to connect. And we would like to ask you the question, why is it important for you to be here today? This is I believe it's something that one of our system conveners is, I think it was Peter Block, one of Peter Block's kind of questions to ask in initial connecting. We've used it a lot with some of our work, but yeah, there's a lot of you, but if you can share with the three of you you'll end up in a breakout room with, and just spend a couple of minutes sharing why it's important for you personally to be here, not necessarily what your organization's role or function is, but why, yeah, what's really motivating you to take the time out and be here today. And we'd really love to hear some of your reflections back in the chat when you return to the wider group. We won't be able to hear reflections from everybody, but we'd really love to get a kind of collective feel for what people are energized by and interested in. So I think Maria's going to put us into some breakout rooms, and we'll see you back in about 6 minutes. We really wanted you to share, anything, I hope that was useful to connect with people. We felt it was really important in the spirit of what we're talking about to that everyone kind of gets straight into connecting, because I guess that's what this work is about. And yeah, please do share any reflections in the chat of what was shared with you about all the different things that people shared about why this work is important and why it's important to be here today, whether it's to do with the system convening, the ripple effect mapping, all of it. Curiosity, we're really interested to know from you, because we wanted to sort of understand what we should give most attention to in these presentations. So really helpful. And it's great to see so many Hackney colleagues here, past and present, and so many allies across this really important work. And I guess to kind of to kind of kick us off, really, I wanted to share why it's important for us to be here today from Hackney, and speaking on behalf of colleagues who will have had a chance to share with others. But I guess the first thing to say is that this work is really important, and we really see how this work is making a tangible and real difference in residents' lives in Hackney who are struggling the most, and who our systems and services so often fail. And we really feel that this way of working can help and preventative working, even within our overstretched, siloed, fragmented and under-resourced systems, and even at times of rapid change and diminishing resources. And the example, I mean, I was just, I guess, one of the livest examples for me at the moment is I had a great opportunity to visit one of our system conveners down at a youth club, where a collaborative group that's really emerged from a shared purpose of wanting to support families who are living for a long time in temporary accommodation, where there are very poor health outcomes, and multiple services that these families are trying to navigate at a really, really difficult time. This drop-in was just magic to see how system convening is helping create the conditions for collaborative working, keeping residents right at the centre of this work. And just seeing the toddlers whose experience of being supported by a voluntary sector organisation and was enhanced by this drop-in at the youth club, where the parent could see housing, immigration, could see the children and family centre hub, could see a social prescriber, all in one place, while their child played in the sunshine with other toddlers, and while those professionals really work together in the best interests of those kids, I guess really brings alive what we're doing this for. And I guess because of that, we want to shout about it so we can all do more of it, because it's really lonely and it's really uncontained and it's not well understood. And I guess sharing this journey with this community of us learning together has really helped us to feel energized and connected, and to know we're not alone in this work. Matthew, massive thanks to Matthew Measy, who hosted the webinar that I first attended back in 2021, that the Centre for Public Impact put on, launching the ebook with Lankelly Chase. And I guess that was, we came across that. I came across that and connected with Matthew, I think, in a breakout room, just like a session just like this, and created the system convener roles, because it really chimed with what we had identified was needed across a few really key areas of work emerging out of the pandemic. I guess our team had been doing a lot of system convening I felt seen and heard in the ebook, and I could recognise what the ways of working that lots of us in the team, many of whom are on the call today, real changes in the way that we'd worked as council officers with communities, working together across the system, across boundaries to keep residents safe and well. And we wanted to build on those things that had been most useful in unlocking that creativity and capacity in the system. So by creating those roles, initially, I think if you can give me the next slide. Yeah, I guess so. Even though lots of us in the team are working in these ways, it was really important to have specific system convener roles in Hackney because the conditions for these ways of working were not there yet. And relational work was really hard to prioritise, but was vital and a key enabler in our collaborative work with communities and across service boundaries, particularly when there were less resources around and need was growing and becoming more and more complex, and the systems continue to be fragmented. We have a really rich service offer in Hackney, but I guess we had really identified through a lot of work on building preventative approaches after the pandemic that we have lots of fragmentation between services and disintegration. We're not always working as effectively as we could be if we were more in deeper relationship with one another. So the priority work that the system convener roles were I sort of set off on the task to work on was around how we support our food network and network of food partners we weren't funding across the borough who were working to feed vulnerable residents, but who were also providing really vital wraparound support and weren't able to get the support that those residents needed always from statutory services. So that was one of the key priorities. Another one was improving services across the system for our refugee and migrant communities, and enabling and supporting the new and radical community infrastructure grants programme designed by my colleague Claire Whitney and colleagues from all the learning through the pandemic on what would happen if we unconstrained the voluntary sector to work with us in more meaningful partnership and providing core funding that focused on purpose. And I guess we really felt that there were opportunities between all of this to use system convening to unlock existing capacity and resources and creativity in the system, and to both enhance the relationships between frontline staff and between community organisations and the council to break down some of those barriers so that we could make sure that it wasn't the residents who were losing out. So we're going to show you a little bit of a video capturing. We've run lots of pilots of working out how we can work on these things. And this is a short video just trying to articulate a little bit of it and bring some of it to life. So while Abby's doing that, this video and piece of work we've been calling Fairer Ways of Working is, I guess, one of the ways we're trying to articulate the values and principles in these ways of working as a kind of set of assets and resources that partners across the system might be able to use to support kind of a move toward a shared language and way of working together on these things so that we can solve problems in different ways.
Okay, so I think I've clicked the right button. Matthew, I can see your screen. Will you give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio when I push play? Let's see, one last time.
Not everyone has equal access to the support they need. Since the pandemic,
okay, here we go.
VCS and council colleagues across Hackney have been working together to implement fairer ways of working. Practices that are trauma-informed and anti-racist. How people work together matters. We can't solve Hackney's problems alone, but by putting residents first, listening to communities, building trust, sharing power and knowledge, we can strive to make everyone's lives better. We call this fairer ways of working.
Today we've been meeting the community infrastructure partners, who are 24 organisations that Hackney Council have grant funded from 2022 to 2025. What we've been hoping to do today is speak to those organisations about the impact that their work has, more than just the numbers. So you might be able to, what does one meal mean in terms of what it means, the impact of a family? So the confidence that coming to an organisation might bring, or the unexpected things that happen when you kind of work with communities.
Our poverty reduction tools for frontline staff sessions have been running for about 2 years now, and they've been a really useful way to not only share practical information with council colleagues and our partners across the voluntary and health sectors, with useful information they can signpost residents to, but also a really valuable space for us to come together, connect and share insights.
And it's not just them, it's any other services that we can work with throughout Hackney Council. We're very open to that, including public health and other organisations, Tastes for Food, get whoever is, they're always welcome because they know these residents are going to be there. And we form that relationship and that collaboration to keep going.
So I'm part of the Hackney Money Hub team, and we're part of the poverty reduction framework within Hackney Council as well. So we sit actually underneath this service already. We do have a lot of residents that generally don't always find it comfortable to speak to the council in general or even approach the council. So to have these sessions with other organisations to show that there are friendly faces behind the council, that we are here to help and support residents.
There is a lot of support for English-speaking clients. However, people from different backgrounds sometimes struggle to navigate the system or understand what support they are entitled to or have. So inclusivity in language.
It's getting the message out to them and maybe going on the street and talking to people and making them aware of what's available for them, because I think people can get stuck in a hole of depression and isolation, and it's about trying to pull those people in so they can engage with the services and get the help they need. It's not all about money, it's about mental health.
All over Hackney, frontline staff and volunteers in community organisations, health and council services are doing amazing work with limited resources. We want to thank all frontline staff supporting those furthest away from services. Please keep in touch and stay connected. There is power in the collective. Together we are strong.
All right, so that got us there, and we think that really sets the tone well for the intent and the need, and just even the way we are trying to work in this system, and highlights really that it's not about our team, it's really about the people we're working with in those relationships. But with this community infrastructure program that Jenny has mentioned and our system conveners, we've had some funding go into it. So we've had 24 of the VCS organizations who have received this sort of core funding grant to work with us in this way that we can say, this is not for a specific aim or outcome. This is for you to do the work that you know needs to be done with the residents that you're closest to. And we've also been, funding the system conveners as a bit of an experiment. And we know that these two things have been really coexisting we can't separate one from the other. We can't separate the way that our system conveners have been working from the community infrastructure grant program. And we've really been trying to then build on the learning and collaboration from that whole system of response, and really how critical we see the VCS in keeping residents safe, recognizing things aren't getting easier after the pandemic. I think that's all written in stone now, unfortunately. And that we're thinking about these ways of working holistically, collaboratively. But then anytime you have funding, of course, the question becomes, how do we evaluate this? How do we say, is it working? How is it working? And how do we actually understand? These are just two shots from some of the work that the system conveners were doing around this community infrastructure grant to understand this sort of space and the system and the connections. And Matthew, you said already, sometimes you can't, maybe this was while breakout rooms are going on, but sometimes you can't really understand system convening as a practice unless you're there in the room witnessing or doing it. So how do we actually then take these hard to evaluate, hard to name things and build understanding around it, especially when there's funding and especially when it's an exploration that we hope leads to more meaningful change. So some of you might remember a call, or might have been on the call about a year ago, last summer, when we were talking about, in the same sort of Q community space, how might how might evaluation of system convening been done? And there was so much richness and so much experience or ideas shared. And one of them was this ripple effect mapping. And this, we have to just thank, Simon Sherbersky for his insights. Once this came up, another colleague in Hackney Council, Mark, who were saying, wait, ripple effect mapping, I know about that. I'll be happy to share about that. So our team said, well, let's try that out. We're not experts, we're not evaluation experts, but this sounds like an approach that is really going to help us get at the heart of what this is all about. What do we believe is happening beyond the initial relationships that we're helping to create and strengthen? So we started by looking at the University of Minnesota's approach and using their field guide to ripple effect mapping, which they've shared really openly, and it's a very clear read, and you get an idea of how to do this. And we altered it just slightly given the context we were working in. So our approach was to hold, instead of doing, the University of Minnesota had people paired up and doing in-depth conversations with each other. So pairs were interviewing each other on what's happened because of this initiative. We gathered people in person, and we did a bit of group rotations, and we did a little bit of a broken down coding and theming and presenting back, just knowing that our community partners are really busy doing their first line of work, which is working with residents. So we brought them together in a little different way than what was outlined in that guidebook, to suit the context we were working in. And of course, we're learning through this, so I'm sure that there were strengths with that approach, but also maybe some things we might try differently in the future. But to really dive into that, Charlie's going to take it on and explain just exactly what those sessions looked like and then how the theming worked for us. So Charlie, over to you.
So Abby's right. We adapted that first stage of an appreciative inquiry and made it a group exercise where we hoped that partners would bounce off each other and kind of think about the process of what the ripple might be together rather than just individually. Because these partners have been working together through the pandemic and then subsequently on the grant for the previous 2 years, we didn't need to do that relationship building part with them as intently, but we did want to have that collective think. So we kind of grouped them together in kind of groups of 4 or 5. And we went around and asked these questions. These are slightly adapted questions from the Minnesota Guide, but specific to the Community Infrastructure Program. We also made sure that we had others who weren't on the grant, who weren't funded there. So some of them were other officers on our team. One was a presenter from an earlier part of a session from an organization called Crew Energy, to have an external kind of voice and challenge, to really understand that we weren't just speaking to each other about things we all recognized. So they might say, well, what did you mean by that? Or talk us through that. So that was a really helpful way that we managed that first session. We did it in person because we think there's a real richness of when we bring partners into a room and that kind of connection happens in all those spaces in between, when they're kind of sitting in between each other in the water break, that kind of thing. But you can do it online too. Abby, can you go to the next slide? Which is another kind of, we brought partners together online and we asked the same sets of questions, and we did that kind of collective conversation, but just on Zoom. So if you are kind of spatially not limited, if you're not working in the locality, you can do it as well, but just in a kind of different approach. So we got loads and loads of insight from these kind of these sessions about what partners thought the impact was and what different achievements they had. Abby, could you go to the next slide? And we had to kind of group them thematically about what we thought this level of we could have grouped it in loads of different ways in the end, about all these different insights from partners. And in many ways, lots of different things would have worked. We decided to come back to the core grant aims of what the Community Infrastructure Program was, which was, meeting the holistic needs of residents, developing and prioritizing partnership, and having trust with communities furthest away from support. But, you could have we looked at some other models as well. Briefly, we kind of explored community, what is it? It's the community, a healthy ecosystem, like kind of one methodology or different things and different strategies, but this is where we landed. And that first map is our first attempt at throwing it all on the wall and seeing kind of where different insights kind of stuck. Abby, can you go to the next slide? But then we had to remake sense of that map because, lots of these things couldn't immediately be split neatly into those categories. So we had to then create kind of sub-themes that were emerging from all of these different insights from partners. And what we kind of found was they kind of loosely grouped into these kind of 7 ideas that partners are telling us about the value of the way that we funded and worked with them over the last 3 years. So some of that, these are the 7 insights, which we'll kind of get onto, which was supporting residents to kind of thrive, working patiently and holistically with people, the continuity and consistency that core funding over 3 years allows, and the opportunity for growth and investment in those organizations that consistency kind of brings, and the opportunity to scan for the horizon and plan for the future. And then also this kind of theme about rich relationships and that kind of what that convening has offered, and the capacity to really engage with us and other services. Abby, can you go to the next slide, please? I mean, and then we brought that back again to partners, because this has constantly been an iterative process, and we didn't want to make assumptions based on, our perspective. So we brought that back, and some of the things they really challenged. So for example, that supporting residents to thrive line, partners told us that's too councilified. It sounds like you're in a kind of, it's too, I don't know, positive. Actually, some of the work we're doing is much more embedded in crisis, and we're not quite out of this stage yet where thriving is still an ambition. And there was a split in the room, but it was a kind of real challenge of that, some of our articulations, which I found really helpful. We also were really keen to articulate that we weren't trying to claim credit for everything the partners had done in this time. I think there's a way that sometimes the way the ripple effect mapping process works for us is it could be implied that we were taking credit for all of their work, that none of this would have happened without how we'd have approached it, where we were kind of more thinking about how has this contributed to these outcomes, because a lot of it is about how they think and approach things anyway. So we tried to frame it around that. We wanted to understand the conditions that allowed kind of positive work to happen. And we were able to take some of that insight about what that kind of funding has allowed into our kind of next round of the VCS strategy, which is kind of how we're funding in the future. Of all of the insights we gathered, about 44% of the impacts were about the strength of relationships and the capacity that grant has allowed to engage in networks and do good work with people across the system. So, you can convene systems, but you do need partners who've got the capacity and ability to engage with you. So these 2 things kind of often sit hand in hand. Abby, could you go to the next slide, please? I just wanted to zoom in on one specific ripple, just to give you an indication of how we've represented it and what we've left off on some of the ripple and what we've included. So this is for one of our partners was speaking about, the grant has allowed closer relationships with councils. And for one organisation, this has meant hosting housing officers coming to their local food bank fortnightly to give housing advice alongside the community food shop that they run. And the different things kind of enabled this to happen. One was the relationship that we were able to form with that community provider, which is not just a relationship because we've just funded them. We've also had the capacity to go and make a meaningful relationship with them, visiting them without an agenda, going and getting stuck in, moving the food boxes, being there for the entire session, understanding what they look like, and then being able to go to our partners in housing and say, actually, I think there's an opportunity here to do this differently. And then instead of, again, just immediately dropping a kind of an outreach offer on an organization, going and building that relationship with housing officers and that organization first before we tried to deliver any advice. So, we took the housing officers to go and see what was going on the ground. And then those sessions kind of have been really successful over the last 2 years. In fact, it's one of the most successful sessions that housing team do, not because they see loads of people each time, but because they go regularly and they built the relationship and the trust is there. So, they might see 4 or 5 people each 2 weeks, but that's over time, that's the most successful engagement they've had. And others have seen that work. So we've had local councillors see the housing officers do that and then mirror that and do that on the alternate weeks. So that with those residents who are engaging in some of the most vulnerable, one of those vulnerable areas in food poverty, have direct access to both their local councillors and their local housing provider, one of their local housing providers, which is a huge impact for those residents. And those housing officers have really kind of benefited from the opportunity to then signpost when they meet residents in kind of need. And the relationship in general between the resident and the council has really improved in that space. I think Euphemia was speaking a little about it in that video. I'm going to pass to Jenny, who's going to, I think, mentioned an example previously, but we kind of visualized that as well with what our colleague Hannah is doing in the TA space.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, so I mentioned briefly about having visited the youth club, where I really just witnessed a very different way of providing public services in place for residents furthest away from services who might otherwise have felt a lot of stigma coming to access support, and may not have trusted the buildings or the people in them to be able to offer them the support. And we're sad that Hannah, who's been leading that work brilliantly, and it's been incredibly difficult in terms of the relationships across the boundaries of this work, in part because of lots of the systemic factors that we're all aware of, whether it be visitors policies in the temporary accommodation hostels, whether it be overwhelm and burnout of staff in roles that are really quite challenging, lack of affordable housing in the borough, lots of differences in opinion about what the thing might be that would make the difference. But by working relationally and bringing these groups together, Hannah was able to work with colleagues to really uncover everyone's motivations for really making a difference and unlock some really creative ideas that have been co-designed in a way that really is going to be sustainable. This work has cost zero money, absolutely nothing, but because we've got the GP on board, because we've got the Children and Family Hub on board, because the voluntary sector on board with all of those trusted relationships, the work was not only happening for the residents, it was happening between the professionals, and you could see how energizing it was to be working in those ways, and what a difference it made to be walking into a space where you felt so warmly welcomed by so many people eager to help you unblock those system barriers because they've been working in those ways. So this is one of Hannah's kind of ripple effects maps for the temporary accommodation outreach work, starting with having capacity to engage with networks and services. The service offer is already rich, but now it's time to invest in relationships. Closer relationships were formed through the Systems Convener. The group brought together included public health, voluntary sector, housing services. So we were able to look at what resources people had collectively. Hannah was able to identify what people could do realistically and what they could sustainably put into place. I'm having trouble reading that next one. I don't know if you can zoom in slightly on that. Yes, sorry. So the fortnightly support from services supported by the voluntary sector for families in temporary accommodation. Families were then able to access support in a trauma-informed setting. There's lots of play equipment there for children. It's in a youth club, which those families felt would be much more comfortable than a children's centre where they didn't feel as comfortable. But they've got the Children and Family Hub there. They've got the health visitors there. They've got things kind of unblocking. And they've got the play bus over the road with a really lovely setting and able to sort of handhold and walk people over. And then the family was able to make informed decisions about the future, obviously evidencing kind of much more strengths-based ways of working. And I think that work, you know, that group is still very much keen to evolve the next stage of the work, listening to what those families are finding most helpful, what they need more of. There's now talk, the next thing we're looking at trying is, rather than, some people can't come in person, but we might be able to get them on a video call to offer a housing kind of appointment, or a help with immigration advice if people can't get down. So we're looking at those, testing the next kind of wave of models. And then I guess some of the other impacts through this is that these families may have more space to connect with one another. And those friendships, I think one of the key one of the things through our community infrastructure work that always stays with me, and actually it's this organisation who shared it with us, was one of the things that they measure is whether or not the parents they work with, who are often quite isolated, have made one good friend as a result of their work. And I guess that really inspires our thinking in this, because actually those are the things that really make a difference when people don't have a safety net, and those are the things that can really make a difference if a parent can't care for a child and needs some support. You know, we need communities that are able to support one another, but that are strong and that have a much more resourced and kind of enabled function of that we're able to use our existing resources in much more creative ways if we can just get around the table together. And I think that work, we are now looking at doing some ripple effect mapping for specifically the temporary accommodation work, to include families and to include those services that have been involved in it, looking at the impacts, but also as a bit of a learning exercise, so some of our leaders could maybe come along and watch this work in action, and really help us to think about how we can develop it further and do more of it.
And just before we get to questions, we wanted to share that, you know, not everything has to be these kind of huge grant programs or funded roles as well. We briefly mentioned the fact that we were doing ripple effect mapping on a session that we hold fortnightly, just to kind of share different tools with frontline staff. And one of our regular attendees was exploring different methods for evaluating their own work. and they kind of took with it and ran with it, and they have then gone on to run their own ripple effect session with 68 others in Hackney. So kudos to Krista at Healthwatch for kind of really taking the ball and running with it there. So I think sometimes small actions can have a big splash, I guess, is what we'd like to end with. Does anyone have any questions? I guess that's the last moment for the last 10 minutes or so. It's really nice to talk to you all.
Thanks, everyone. If you want to use if you go to the react button down the bottom, you can raise your hand and we can get to people's questions. I haven't actually been going through the chat very effectively because I've been writing things, so I think there probably are some in there, but anyone want to sort of come off mic or raise their hand and ask a question? Bhupinder, oh no, wait, are you raising your hand or just
I'm just clapping.
Okay. Okay.
It's my ripple effect.
Sean in Australia, I believe.
Yeah, thanks very much for this. This is just fabulous. The question I had is that your work at Hackney, you've got a grant and been able to pay people. Have you ever seen this working in a voluntary capacity? And then there's a second piece to the question, which relates to whether it's unpaid or paid, which is around sustainability. So how do you get it to a tipping point and then make sure it stays there?
Yeah, really good question. I think, so it isn't, just to be clear, so although we were funding 24 of our community-based organisations, most of the organisations that we've been working with this, we're not funding. So all of the kind of food banks and the food partners that are community rooted, one of the first things the two system conveners were asked to do was go to meet all of the people providing vital food support to those in food poverty and find out what they need from us. Find out what they need from council services, find out what they need from health services, and let's work out how to build those relationships. So the work started from what do the people we're not funding need from us. Since we can't give them money, we would love to be in a position to be able to fund, but these were organisations we had been able to fund during the pandemic, and suddenly we weren't able to give them money anymore. So it was kind of, well, what can we do? Can we offer space? Can we unblock things? Can we build relationships? Okay, you're struggling to navigate mental health services. How might we help you with that? Or your families don't really know about the local children's centre, and yet they're coming in and there might be supports that they can get access there. So I guess it was really driven by that need, but the work with the community, funding those organisations in that way meant it was possible to ask them to give up time to come and work on our council tax pilot, for example, or our work in families with temporary accommodation, where obviously they're not being paid. Oftentimes the power dynamics are difficult because as council officers you're being paid to be there, and you're still asking voluntary sector organisations you're not funding to be a part of those conversations without recognising and funding their lived experience and expertise as a consultant. So we're always grappling with that, and that's where we want to get to. But we can't not work with organisations because we're not funding them, because we see all organisations working directly with residents as critical, really, and particularly those working who have trusted relationships with residents who won't come to us directly. And I think that's been at the core. But thanks for asking that question.
And I think just to, Sean, your question about sustainability and the tipping point, at least on the system convening side of things, we're in the middle of this right now, so who knows what the outcome will be, but we're trying to bring to life what it means to be a system convener or to do system convening to in different ways to the people who are making budgetary decisions or who are doing the review of our service and making decisions around what roles will be there. The writing on the wall right now is that there will be a system convening element to that. And I think the ways that we've been capturing have really tried to bring that to life or been helpful to bring that to life. So the video you saw, the ways that it's not just the two people who are the system conveners. We've been trying to articulate that it's not just those two people, but it's the way of working, and there are so many others doing this, and trying to also then articulate and bring light to the light in different ways that could give different dimensions. How is it different from community navigating? How is it different from coordinating? How is it different from these other aspects of working in these ways? So that's live. We'll keep this group updated. I'm sure if we get system convening more embedded in Hackney Council as a way forward.
Thanks, Abby. Should we go to Genevieve and then Simon? Maybe try and make it quite punchy and quick, both of you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Great presentation. I'm from Hackney. I'm a huge supporter of our convening teams. And what I really wanted to add was, because of my role, which is legislation, strategy, and projects within our service area, I am not frontline. But the bi-weekly tools for frontline staff that I attend here in Hackney, that brings the community partners together, it allows me to listen to what they're doing in our community, really feel how they're able to support our residents, plus allow them to ask questions so that we can manage expectations, deliver the same message face to face, because of all the people they deal with. You know, they don't always trust the council. I have no idea how that ever happened, but they don't always, and it's our community partners that they trust. So for them to know that they can come and ask me a question that has to do with my service area, or I can call Charlie and say, Charlie, who was that individual, or what was that organization name? I need to tell someone that needs to know it. I need to connect them in, tell them to come to the tools for frontline staff. I think we all should be wearing our system convener hat at some point during our days, because we're either need to receive the information, we need to share the information. It's breaking down silos that governments have been, sadly, had to work in, but those things are changing. So I have a very strong feeling for all of these things, as you can hopefully tell, and I just wanted to add my 2 bits in there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Genevieve. So that sounds like maybe that's not so much a question, and maybe we'll get to Simon. I don't know if you've got a question or just more to share.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a sort of bit of a line of inquiry, really. Hi, Jenny, nice to see you again. I was just really curious. I guess one of the tensions in this sort of work is obviously the need to justify the funding that was given in the first place. And to what extent did this allow you to operate, to identify where things weren't working as well as where things were? And, you know, were there examples of that where you were able to operate with slightly more open eyes as to the negatives and not be tempted to sort of sweep them under the carpet and only present the sort of shiny, positive picture of the way this stuff works? Because it's difficult and it's complicated and all that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And I guess there's always going to be unintended consequences, some of which might be negative. I guess there's always a story that comes before this. And I think Louise's contribution in the chat really speaks to some of this, that actually is often, you know, this work is long. And when I think back to the work around temporary families in temporary accommodation, the work that Hannah's doing really built on the work that our previous system convener did in terms of the relationships, and a lot of that was non-starters. You know, we kept trying to start things, we kept trying things that didn't quite work, we kept having to go back to the drawing board, and so there's something about the timing and the conditions that staying in kind of quite deep relationship with each of these bits of the system that need to work better together. There's been something about timing, I think, that's been really important. I don't know if you'd agree, Charlie and Abby and colleagues, that you know, sometimes you can just feel when somebody's ready to go, and then it's time to get going. And because you already have the relationships with them, they might just suddenly get a bit of funding, and then suddenly this work can have life, and you've already done the groundwork and the relationships are there, so you haven't got all that usual kind of stuff around stakeholder engagement, getting on the same page, because you're already working to a shared purpose. Even if you haven't got any resource to do anything particular about it, you've usually got some resources you can use differently, or ways of thinking about it. So yeah, I think there are a lot of it's a real mess, and there are lots of negative, messy bits of this journey, and I suppose we're kind of pulling out some of the impacts that kind of give us energy and give us the sort of energy to keep going. But there's a lot of knockbacks that can really dampen that as well. So I guess, yeah, I think that there is definitely a kind of bigger picture to all of this, and lots of complex reasons for that.
I guess just to add to that, there have been definitely places and times where we've tried to bring people together and it's not gone well, or it's not gone how we'd hoped. Not sometimes because of those partners and the kind of the readiness of the system for that conversation, or sometimes how we've approached it. You know, we've kind of maybe been too close to maybe we've not had the courage to be more innovative at that moment than we should have done, and then that's meant that that session hasn't gone as we'd hoped. But then I think Jenny's right. I guess it kind of it's all kind of material for the next attempt, right? And it's all kind of feeding into that kind of learning of, well, what were the conditions then? Why did that not go as we'd hoped? And what can it allow for the future? And how can we reframe those knockbacks? That kind of thing.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. We're actually up at time. It's 1 o'clock. The hour has passed very fast. I'd love to have heard from other people. Judy was using ripple effect mapping, and I know Gloucestershire were mentioning it. But thanks so much to the team from Hackney, and thanks to you all for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the breakouts. There is, I'll just put it in the chat again, if you want, Louise and I just quickly organised a sort of, what are we calling it? A sort of meetup for a couple of Mondays' time in the evening. So if you want to sort of drop by and talk to some other systems conveners, there's not too much of a plan for it. It's kind of informal. Do go to that link. Thanks so much. I think we'll send you a follow-up email, and actually with a bit of luck we'll be able to put, there's a link in there to the group space that Q has for systems conveners, because we might put the slides and things like that in there. And thanks again to the team, Charlie, Abby, sorry Hannah couldn't make it, and Jenny as well. So thanks everyone, and keep up the systems convening.